This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. I'm your host, Robonzo. This podcast features conversations with indie music artists and indie pros and me. It's all intended to help other artists be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Welcome to another episode. Thank you for sticking me in your earbuds or on your speaker today. I really appreciate it. It is windy as frack here in Panama today. It's beautiful, but it's windy. We are in the windy season, the dry season as they call it. I didn't mention this in the last episode, but we just moved. We being my wife and I. We just moved. We not far from where we were, not far at all. We upgraded the otherwise awesome view we already had. And arguably more important, I improved my studio space for doing this, talking to you and recording drums and vocals and guitar and that kind of stuff. And guest space too, so next house concert, when those things can happen, I got a little more space for that kind of deal. Life's good, and frankly, I feel a little guilty sometimes. I won't even tell you how good it is, in case yours is not quite as much. But if it's not, I hope it is. Your life gets super good super soon. Hey, by the way, if you have feedback or comments or questions about the podcast, please go to unstarvingmusician.com and just scroll to the bottom of the page and send me a message from right there. You can write or message me hands-free right there from unstarvingmusician.com, bottom of the page. I'd love to hear from you. So my guest, Johnnie Gilmore, is a bass player that has reached virtuoso status. He honed his chops and stagecraft in part as a street performer in his hometown of Boston. He's living the LA life now. He has a great EP out as of October 2020, which is when we spoke for this interview. I can't believe it. I've had so many episodes in the pipeline. They're going that far back. It's kind of crazy. The EP is called When You Come Home. It's really good. I encourage you to check it out, which you can do at johnnygilmore.com. And we talk about how that happened, the EP, how it came together amidst this stupid pandemic that we're still in, as I record this January 19 of 2021. Hey, would you like to help me help other independent musicians and indie music fans find this podcast? You can do so by subscribing on your favorite podcast or audio service. It really does help. And if you love this podcast, if you love this episode, please consider supporting it by joining the Unstarving Musician community. You can do so by visiting unstarvingmusician.com. It's free to sign up. As part of the community, you will receive occasional emails from me with tips and insights for your music journey. And it's not just me giving you tips and insights based only on my years of experience as a gigging musician, but also stuff I'm learning from the now hundreds of songwriters, musicians, and industry professionals that I speak with as part of this podcast. And I'll also fill you in on the latest and upcoming episodes of the podcast. It's all free. You can unsubscribe at any time. And if you'd like to become a producer sponsor of the show, you can do so by visiting unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor for more info about exclusive producer sponsor content and perks that I am putting together. You know, if you want to up your support game. So Johnnie was brought to my attention by Zoë Sonnenberg, who was featured in episode 180 of the podcast. At the time of our conversation, like I mentioned, October 2020, the pandemic was nearing its peak crisis status in the LA area where Johnnie now lives. We talk about this and how it's changed his career and life. He did just release that awesome EP, When You Come Home, which you can check out at johnnygilmore.com. That's a great website, by the way, and since we're talking about websites, I need to tell you about some news from Bandzoogle, the all-in-one website platform for musicians and bands that I'm always ranting and raving about. So they have added integration with Printful, print-on-demand drop shipping services. So now it's easier for musicians to create and sell merchandise directly to their fans from their website, commission-free, using Bandzoogle. I'll mention this again at the end of the episode, but what are you waiting for? Go to bandzoogle.com and use the promo code Robonzo to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. And the promo code, again, is Robonzo, R-O-B-O-N-Z-O. Johnny shares his recent experience in going from performing live to taking requests on Instagram to pay the rent, which he's having fun with. And actually, this is where Zoë Sonnenberg's mom heard him play after the gold rush and connected him with Zoë. And Zoë dropped me a note and said, "Hey, this guy's really good. You might want to have him on your podcast. He is really good. It's pretty cool. Wait till you hear his music. Fun to talk to, too." He'd also lost both of his grandparents on his mother's side at the time we spoke. We, of course, discussed the oddity of dealing with loss during this time of the pandemic. When You Come Home was recorded like in April, May of 2020 and was intended to be a full-length record. He thought he was going to be recording in the fall, but as life changed, so did Johnny's plans for this collection of songs, which is to our benefit because we get to hear it in this recent release of his. So, all right, here he is. Please enjoy this conversation with me and Johnnie Gilmore. That's easy enough. I can pronounce that right, I bet.
That's right, yeah.
So, I didn't even put together until this afternoon that we're mutually acquainted with Zoë. Actually, it was this morning with Zoë Sonnenberg.
Absolutely, the greatest promoter of all time.
How do you guys know one another?
It's a funny story. So since the virus hit and, all my gigs got canceled like any musician, I've been taking requests on Instagram in exchange for tips. And it's actually been really fun. I've had to learn a lot of music that I probably should have known anyway all along. And some of these arrangements have actually worked well enough that I've kept them in my repertoire. So I'm getting some repertoire out of this too, which is fun. But somebody requested a Neil Young song called After the Gold Rush.
Yeah, I know it.
It's a beautiful tune. And her mom apparently found it on a hashtag or something and sent it to her. And then she hit me up just to say, "Hey, I love the music. Keep doing what you're doing." And so we've just been in touch on social media ever since.
That's cool. Well,
she's a cool cat.
Yeah. She's actually on the podcast today. So she's featured on the podcast today. So it's ironic that we're talking.
I noticed that. Well, I actually I was doing a little prep for this last night, and I saw it went live last night, and I sent it to her, and I was like, "Yo, you didn't tell me you were going to be on this."
She didn't know till this morning, or she probably first found out when you told her. So
maybe.
So yeah,
I mean, classic fact. She was very cool about it. It's like, "Oh, I didn't know it was up yet," or something, to the effect of, whatever ho hum.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a rock star. Big fan.
Yeah, she's great. She sent me a couple of good interviews, and so I just also found out this morning that she isn't with Saxco anymore. I'm like, oh man, but I found her, I had her email, and so she got in touch, and then she's like, "Oh, I see you're interviewing a friend of mine," and then I went back and looked at your original email. I'm like, oh, there she is in your email. So so that's cool. So are you in LA?
LA, yeah. I grew up in Boston, but I live in LA now.
And how is LA these days?
Well, it was on fire a lot recently.
Yeah.
It is not as on fire anymore as it was, which is very nice.
Yes, that's good.
And we had a lot of earthquakes the last couple of days, which is not terrifying for this East Coast boy. But the good news is that I think most of the scene is still here. I think most people are still toughing it out. So I know a couple of people I used to play with a drummer who was from France. And I think a few weeks ago or a month ago, he just moved back to France. He's like, they have it under control out there a lot better than we do. And
that's good.
It's so expensive to live here anyway. I can move back home. I'm going back to France. Peace. But I think most people are staying. I think the scene will be in a decent position to bounce back as long as venues open again, as long as depending on how much damage there is in the industry itself, remains to be seen.
Sure.
Weather is still very nice. I think most people are still here. Food is still pretty good.
That's good. You have that. So from what I've heard of you, you're incredibly versatile. So it makes me curious as to the kind of gigs that you were doing there locally. I know it looks like you've done a wide range of things, including touring, but what kind of things do you pick up locally there?
Yeah, whatever pays the rent. And that's the honest answer. And, I get people have asked me a lot, like how I would characterize my music or like what kind of styles I usually play, things like that. And honestly, I mean, I really subscribe to the Louis Armstrong idea that the only two kinds of music are good and bad, and everything else is, I think really having a good lineup and having good people to play with is the thing that makes the music really work. I don't know because I know you play too, if that's been your experience.
I've had the luxury of playing on a very part-time basis, and actually, it's just this year that I recorded my first original composition, and so I'm going through the motions of learning how to release something, and I'm working on a video, and someone's already asked me to do an album based on what they heard, and but all my playing, I was a gigging drummer, so I usually had a couple of bands I was working with regularly, and then I was subbing for people. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the same kind of racket, basically.
Yeah, and a lot of covers for me. Has that been the case when you're playing locally?
Sure, yeah. I used to have a residency in Koreatown at a place called Lock and Key every second and fourth Tuesday.
That's nice.
And I hope very much that we will continue to have this residency when the virus has passed us. But that was kind of like it was really fun. I mean, it was a cover gig, but it wasn't like a karaoke night or something. Like we could do our own versions of the songs and just like, improvise, and people would come sit in, and, we played like a lot of fun stuff. We played like standards. We played Stevie Wonder. We played like Alan Stone. I mean, just kind of whatever we felt like doing.
Yeah,
and it was just a blast. It was like we were getting paid to hang out.
That's cool.
So there's been some of that. I play regularly with an indie neo soul band called It's Butter. We have a great time. They're awesome. And then I do my solo stuff whenever I play with So Far Sounds. I used to play at Universal City Walk before. All of this is before COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
I toured with my solo show. I toured as a sideman with a couple of different bands. And then, the fill-ins and the one-offs and like hey, my friend's drummer said that they'd worked with you and I need a bass player for a gig at whatever,
Yeah. Well, wow, you really are so talented. As we started talking, and I realized that you've done or are doing, some of the same things that I have done, and I don't play at your level. I always, I kind of joke in my writing that, I'm an intermediate drummer at best, but largely a beginner in many regards, depending on what we're looking at, right? But I was just sitting here imagining, God, how does a guy like this, get found? And I know a lot of it is just hard work, persistence, luck, those kind of things. And I know that you're working towards that. So, and I'm really hopeful it happens for you. Let's talk about your latest album, your EP, right? I can call it an EP.
EP is a good word. Yeah. And by the way, you're too kind. Thank you for the kind words.
Oh, dude, you're amazing. So When You Come, it came out October 2nd.
When You Come Home. Yeah. October 2nd.
Sorry about that. How did I miss that?
None of our brains work right after all this quarantining.
Yeah. And I'm kind of, I was trying to catch up on your work. You sat in my inbox for a while, and thank you for kind of pinging me back. And I'm trying to go through, I'm really lucky with the podcast lately in that a lot of people are coming my way. Some of my ask, let them know I have a lot in the pipeline already, and some of them aren't necessarily good right now, but they might be later. Tell people that. But I listen to your stuff. I was like, okay, I haven't done anything other than maybe I'm forgetting Ari's last name. I know she knows who you are. Maybe you know who she is. It's eluding me, but female bass player, and she's quite the virtuoso as well, and has done.
Ari Cap.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, man, she's awesome.
Yeah, and I think her interesting thing right now is that she's an online teacher, and she just really loves that. But when I listened to you, and the more I listened to you, I was like, it's kind of like what Ari does in a way. And when you were talking about the characterization of your music, and then I'll shut up and let you talk about your record, but I was thinking, this is, if I was going to describe you to somebody in the short time I've been listening, I'd say this is kind of like almost like classical guitar, but he's playing an electric bass in it. And then I've since noticed that you play just a wide range of stuff, like the Insta covers. I was calling them to myself, the Instagram covers, and your original music. So it's great. So yeah, tell me about. I'd love to know about the process of putting together the songs and recording of When You Come Home. And I'd love to hear a little comparison as a follow-up to Salt of the Earth, which you did in 2018, right?
2018, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so the mic is yours.
Okay, great. So, I'd actually had a plan. My plan for 2020, I had my first like true national tour as a solo artist was booked for April and May. So we all know how that turned out.
Yeah.
Just in time for me to book all the airfare and like get my lodgings together and everything. And then like, it was like a week before I was supposed to fly out. It all got canceled. It was a real bummer.
Yeah.
I was going to do that in the spring and then record in the fall. And so I had a couple of songs ready already that I thought, could be like maybe half of an album or like a little more than half of like another record.
Mm-hmm.
And then the virus came and everything shut down. And, part of it is just that like, okay, well, let's flip it. Maybe I'll record now and maybe tour in the fall. Obviously that timeline didn't work either.
Yeah. The last year.
Yeah. But it was partly just about that. Like I have all this free time. I'm not going to sit here like a bump on a log. I'm going to do something. And then, the worse the news got and the worse this year has kind of been panning out, the more I started to really feel like there's a place for music to fill this giant gaping hole that this stupid virus has left in our lives.
Sure.
And, I've obviously lost gigs and money and, things that are dear to me personally from the virus. My mother's parents also both died from the virus back in May. And just like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, the feeling of like, I still haven't seen my mom since then because she's back in Boston. And, I was long expecting to play at the funeral whenever that did happen. And they were a very advanced age. So it wasn't a surprise when they got sick that they, were in a very bad state, that the virus was very cruel to them. But I'd always expected I would actually play at the funerals, like having to pre-record a video and like send it in from LA, just like, it's so unsatisfying. There's no closure.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like there's really a place for music to come in and try to fill that gap, to try to give us like some entertainment, some escapism, but also just the sense of, we're all in this together. We all feel this thing happening to us. And it's kind of a cruel equalizer in that sort of sense. And so I wanted to make a record to do that, something that's like my sort of pee into the outside world, all the people and places that I've missed, and a little bit of catharsis for us all going through, this massive shitstorm swirling around us.
Yeah. Well, I gathered that it was personal to the degree that you were relating it to what's going on. So that's very nice. And thanks for sharing that about your family. And I'm sorry, to hear that.
Appreciate that.
And yeah, it's so hard, such a weird time to try and deal with loss, as so many of us know. And so you worked with RMI Records on this one, which was not what you did on the first one, right?
They're both RMI. Actually,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you find yourself hooked up with those guys?
So I went to Wesleyan for college, and Noah Behrman, who's a wonderful piano player who founded the label, he was my mentor there. I studied with him for the better part of 4 years.
Okay.
And I actually sent him the like kind of rough mixes of Salt of the Earth back in 2018 just to say, hey, like, what do you think about this? Like, is this a good record? Is this cohesive? And he shot back with a couple of notes like, this is a little kind of Easter egg thing for people that listen, but Swamp House used to have a bunch of overdubs on it. It was like a kind of million layers of bass sort of thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, that's a little weird. Like it should just be all solo. That would be a lot more cohesive. I'm like, okay. And then I think he had a note about the mixing something. And then he also said, if you want to release this on my label, I'd be down to release it for you. And I'm like, oh yes, that'd be perfect. And then, our mutual friend, Dave Copperman, does like the album art, album design for them. So he did my cover for that and this record. He painted that.
That's nice.
Of me, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And he did such a bang up job, not just because, of his pure skills, which are impressive enough, but I sent this to him and I'm like, listen, this is like a Corona catharsis record and all that. But like, I did my whole spiel, but it's like, I don't want the cover to be like sad bass man locked up inside who hasn't seen the sun in 6 months. Like, I still like my life. I liked it more last year. It was more fun, but like, I'm still really lucky to have a place and be alive and to make music for my living. And also, like, I do see the sun. Like, I don't want it to be like I'm locked in the attic or something.
Yeah.
So he came up with this beautiful idea of like the abstract space with the sunlight streaming in and everything, and it's just a knockout.
That's cool. Thanks for
So
describing it. It gives me something and listeners to, look at differently. Um, it's a pretty striking cover. I first saw it on Bandcamp and the landing page for the album. I think it's one of the links that you provided me. It kind of covers a good bit of the page on my laptop, right? So I guess it depends on how you're viewing it, but it's pretty striking. I like it. You did a nice job, and that's cool that
he
you had
did.
him to
Yeah.
work with you on both records. Had I haven't gotten to listen to either of them many times, but I definitely felt a difference in my initial run throughs. How I mean, maybe it's just the times we're in, but is there anything else that drove you in what might be considered, at least in your own head, a new direction? I mean, it kind of seems that way to me. You're in a new direction somewhat. So, is there something else outside of what you just described?
Yeah, well, Salt of the Earth was basically like a demo. I
Mm.
mean, that's kind of how I looked at it. Is like I just want to make something that can like be on Spotify, something I can share with people and be like, I exist, here I am, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, there isn't really a lot that links those 11 tunes other than just these are the 11 best songs I have right now.
Yeah.
It's fine. I mean, I think that record holds up for having been like 22 when I made it. I'm like, okay, well, I wasn't bad for 22, but
Not at
and
all.
like I mixed that one myself because I didn't, you know, have the funds to pay an engineer to do like a really good job with it. And I think it sounds fine. You
Yeah.
know, someone else could have done a better job, but it's okay. But with this one, it's just a lot more mature. Like part of it is I've gotten better. So I think I played this one better than the last one. I think the songs are better. I think as a songwriter, I've matured a lot from the Salt of the Earth days. I actually invested in a proper mix, so the sound is way better on this one than it was in the last one. And then, you know, there's actually a kind of overarching thematic guide with this record, which I
Yeah.
think makes it feel a lot more personal, makes it hit home a lot harder, and it's more focused, which I like too. There isn't any extra stuff in there that doesn't need, not that I think there was with Salt of the Earth necessarily, but it's a very sprawling record. You
Yeah.
know, this one I think is an easy, like, sit down and listen all the way through for people who still do that. I think it's really doable with this
Yeah.
one. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It is something you can kind of listen through, even a first time and find interest from song to song. And probably, I'm sure the EP aspect of it, the shorter, the lesser songs can help a little bit with that in some cases. Um, yeah, you mentioned that you mixed the first one yourself. That's why I was thinking that RMI was something new for you, but you did a great job. And yeah, I definitely noticed. Oh, I know what I want to ask. You mentioned the thematic aspect of this one. Did that was that something you planned? And I'm asking for personal reasons because as I think about trying to do an EP, having just recorded the first thing I've ever recorded that was my own, I already have my thoughts for a second piece, and I'm like, is this going to sound so different from the other one? And as you talk about being thematic, uh, I, I wonder, well, for me, could that just sort of happen when the songs are done? And as a lyricist, um, I was listening to a friend's record the other day who spent a lot of time playing folk, but I found out I'm going to talk to her again. I talked to her a couple of years ago, I think now, but she's a bass player and a fiddle player, and she's a singer. But she was playing folk, she told me, because that's what she thought she was supposed to do. But now she's playing rock. And so I'm listening to this, but for her as a songwriter, and I attribute it to the fact that she was playing folk so much and writing those types of songs that she's a storyteller. And so, yes, I'm telling a story in my song, but I'm a little bit, I really, probably my primary love is rock music. And so I kind of come from this era where the story has a lot of interpretation that can be put into it. So there are just glimpses into the story. So for me, I see being thematic as challenging. I don't know how necessary it is, but how does it work for you?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a mixture of planned and unplanned. I mean, at first, I recorded this back in like April or May.
Mm-hmm.
So there was still a lot of 2020 left to get through that we didn't know was coming. And actually the tunes that I put on this were, you know, things I was going to put on, you know, the full length record that I was theoretically going to record in the fall anyway. But they made sense to me because they were about people and places that I was missing in quarantine. Vineyard Rhodes, I knew when I wrote it that it was a traveling song, and I couldn't think of a title to save my life. So I just posted a little clip of it on Instagram and said, hey, people, if anybody has a title, I'd be deeply in your debt. And somebody, a fan from my Boston busking days, suggested that. And I just love the title, like to think of driving around Martha's Vineyard. It just kind of reminds me of home now when I play it. Mm. So there's that. Wishing Well, I wrote about a girl that I realized after a few dates was friend zoning me. And we are still very good friends.
Yeah.
So I miss her. She's a very cool cat. Cabin Fever, self-explanatory. You know, that one, that's the song that really came together in lockdown. That's like the newest of the new stuff. Mm-hmm. And it sounds to me like a, you know, caged animal, like rattling the cage door, like wanting to get out. When You Wish Upon a Star, I mean, I love that song and I've been playing it since I was in college, but it's never hit harder than now. I've never wanted the spirit of that song to be more true than I do now. And then When You Come Home was about another friend who moved to New York City from LA. So it just like, these all felt like songs about the outside world, about people that are not here in this studio apartment with me. And so it just felt appropriate. Yeah. And then as things got worse and worse, it really took on like an extra significance. Like, you know, we're not going to be in lockdown for a month or two, and we're not going to lose a few people to this virus. We're going to be locked down for a year, and we're going to lose a lot of people to this thing, and a lot of people are going to be hurting. So it was always the idea to make, you know, a record sort of about like wanting to cathartically break quarantine, but the significance of it took on some extra layers. Once, you know, we are in like the mixing stage and doing the cover art, and like the world is just burning all around us. Yeah. So it was a bit of, you know, circumstances collaborating with the concept, and then partly like, yeah, there was a vision going into it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I guess it's just the outcome of your emotions that you've been going through, which is nice. I think that's seems like from what I know about writing songs that is a great thing to rely on for sure.
For sure.
So you mentioned your busking days. Excuse me. I caught in your bio that you did some street performing, and I'm like, oh yeah, you're perfect for that, right? Or were, I don't know if you still are, just internally, but I spoke with a street performer for the first time in the last couple of months. We met because I was doing an article for Forbes.com on collaboration apps, and he is using one called Tracked, and he really likes recording, but he travels constantly. And he released a bunch of stuff he recorded using the app by and large on Spotify recently, and he's really good. He calls himself blues fusionist and master looper. But I saw that you were doing that. Do you still do it? And do you have any reflections on your past experience with it that you would mind sharing?
Oh, it was crazy. It was the hardest gig in show business.
Really?
I really believe that. I was still playing at Universal City Walk out here when the virus came, which is, it kind of is and isn't, but it's like the 5-star hotel version of busking up there. Like it's private property, so they can book you ahead of time and like get a whole month schedule in advance. And there's security everywhere. I mean, the first time I was up there, it felt like, you know, an episode of 24 or something, like the bomb sniffing dogs and like there's like 3 different breeds of like uniformed security and like law enforcement up there. There's like all kinds of stuff, cameras everywhere. So when they were like setting me up, like, here's your spot, here's where you play. They're like, by the way, there's a camera right there. There's a camera right there. There's a camera right there. If anybody takes your money, they will be on the ground in like a minute and we'll have it all back for you. Like, so it was totally different.
Where was this?
Real world. Universal City Walk.
Okay.
At Universal Studios Hollywood. Okay. So it also tipped way better than like real busking, like, because everybody, like, what does a ticket to Universal Studios Hollywood cost? Like, you know, $100 or something. I mean, you know, who can afford to do that? These people have money, you know, and they're okay with just like throwing it at the musicians.
Yeah. That's
So,
cool.
and it was a performance program. I mean, I made connections out there. I met like famous people playing out there. I met Thundercat at City Walk. I met like the whole backing band for Rascal Flatts. I used to play like
Wow.
right outside of a kind of sushi place.
Uh-huh.
And I noticed there was like a table of these four dudes and they were watching and I was like, hey, okay, cool. And one of them comes over and gives me a tip and he says, like there's kind of, it's always funny how sometimes people, like the most common conversation I think you have as a street performer is oh, do you play? And it's like, oh, I used to play like when I was in college, but nothing like this. And I haven't touched it in years, like whatever. And then it's like, oh, okay, you give me your money in exchange, you get to live vicariously through me for a few minutes. That's cool, But this guy comes over and he's like, God, I love your chord voicings and you've got all these fourths and ninths in it. And it's like your textures are so like he sounded way too educated about music to just be like some guy that used to play as a hobbyist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you must play. You clearly know what you're talking about. And he's like, oh yeah, we're the entire band of Rascal Flatts right over there. I was like, what? Like, there's been a couple of those where it's like, oh, never mind. Like my dynamic of like, oh, I'm the musician and you're the hobbyist is like totally flipped. Like you're this like super all-world pro, So, and it was a great program just in general. I had a lot of fun playing up there. But
it's really cool.
Street performing is like the best like skin thickening exercise you can have because, I've had days out there where like I was busking in Copley Square in Boston a few years ago. And I got a tip from a woman who was a bass player. So that's perfect. But she said that she'd suffered a concussion about 10 months prior. And listening to me was the first time she'd been able to listen to music without getting a headache.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, right. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to be thinking about this for, the rest of my life. I was on Newberry Street out there a while ago and some dude was like super into the music. He's like dancing, having a great time. He flips me a big tip, like a 50 or something. And he's just on the spot. He's like, how would you like to tour India? Like you can come to my place and you stay at my house as my guest and I'll set up all gigs and clinics for you. And I was like, you know what, here's my business card, hit me up, let's do that. And he never got back to me. But like, you just have those moments where people are total strangers who have somewhere they're trying to go and they stop on the sidewalk and listen to you play and flip you a tip. And like, I've made lifelong friends and really dear like collaborators. I dated a woman I met busking once. Like there's been some really crazy, like awesome stuff that's happened. And then I've had my days where like, when I first got to LA, I didn't really know anybody. So I was mostly busking to make my living. And then the more my network grew, the less I had to do that, which is very nice. But I was on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica playing in front of the Apple Store. And a homeless woman smashed a laptop in front of the store and she started yelling a really obscene phrase over and over again, stripped naked, and started peeing on what was left of the laptop.
Oh my goodness.
And people were like gathered around with their phones. I mean, there was a Freudian psychoanalysis bit in there about like the lack of empathy that people are just like, oh my God, I gotta get a video of this. Like this woman is in obvious distress and society has failed her. But anyway, I was like, I don't want any part of this. I don't want to be in these videos. I don't want to be here right now.
Wow.
This was back in Boston, but I was in the subway and it was the downtown Crossing subway station, which is not like the cleanest subway station, I mean, not that any of them are, but is kind of a sketchy neighborhood. I probably shouldn't have been there, but there's a lot of foot traffic.
Yeah.
I was busking and an MBTA police officer said, hey, listen, you shouldn't leave the money out like that. You could get robbed. And I said, well, I appreciate your concern, but that's kind of how busking works. Like I have to leave the money out. People won't tip me. So I'm good. Thanks though. And he said, well, okay, if you do get robbed, I will not protect you. And he just walked off.
Nice.
I know, right? It's like, isn't that your job?
I warned you.
I mean, you don't have to like stand a post or anything, but like, are you really like going to play like some petty grudge with me right now?
That's crazy.
So yeah,
wow.
I got rained on, I got snowed on, I got heckled. There's a lot of ups and a lot of downs with that gig, and you just keep going. So crazy experiences, but it's been a blast, and it was the right place for me to be at that time. I wasn't confident enough and didn't have enough repertoire to be like booking shows and making records and like kind of really doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like the training wheels, I guess.
Yeah, good to know. Yeah, it's really interesting. All right, let's wrap up on what you think, or maybe I'm saying I started with what you think because everything seems so up in the air at the moment, but maybe it's not really. What are your plans in the coming months or into next year?
Yeah, it is really up in the air, isn't it?
Feels that way for me.
Yeah, I've been keeping a close eye on So Far Sounds and Broadway, because to me, those feel like like the crowd sizes are relatively smaller. Social distancing should be easier. There's also like, at least theoretically, a lot of money behind those two like sides of the music industry. And you're not talking about like crowds of many thousands of people. And you're only talking about like a handful of artists in each city or whatever. So I've always felt like the sooner those come back, the sooner everything else can stand to come back. And they keep, especially with Broadway, they keep pushing the deadline back further and further. Mm-hmm. Like at first it was, we're going to be shut down until June. And then they were shut down until September. And then it was January. And now it's like next September. And So Far Sounds just laid off a bunch of city directors. So, that's not coming back anytime soon. So I really don't know. Certainly still be taking requests on Instagram. I've been doing some live stream shows from my apartment, which have been fun, not as fun as having people in the room, but it's been enough to scratch the itch. Yeah. I will be voting on November 3rd. We all should be, or sooner, right. If you can vote sooner. Yeah. I think the game plan for now is just to hang tight as long as possible and just hope that this nightmare is past us as soon as we can get it past us. Yeah. Well, I hope that Instagram continues to be kind to you, and I love your music. I hope this helps a few more people find you and appreciate you, and maybe add a little bit of the Who luck to your life, and someone else comes around. And more than that, I hope that we stay connected. You'll definitely hear from me again, because we'll have this coming out in some weeks ahead. Right. So yeah, thanks again for spending time with me, man. I really appreciate it, Johnny. I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me on, and congrats on the EP coming up. I look forward to hearing it. Well, thank you. I'll share the song. I have no idea like when I'll get the whole thing done, but it's a learning process for me. So thank you. For us all, indeed. All right. Cheers, man. All right. Be well. Yeah. This episode was powered by Bandzoogle, the easiest all-in-one professional website platform for musicians and bands. Two things that will help ensure you're in control of your music business and your fan-based community are a website and an email list. Bandzoogle can help you do both. Plus, a solid website makes you look legitimate. Serious musicians, singers, songwriters, composers, and performers know this to be true. If you don't yet have your own website, check out Bandzoogle. It was created by musicians for musicians. I use it and I love it. It's as easy to use gets, and you don't have to worry about plugin updates and security patches. Bandzoogle takes care of all that for you. The features and support are both incredible. See for yourself. Go to bandzoogle.com to start a 30-day free trial and use the promo code RABONZO to get 15% off your first year. Plans start at just $8.29 a month. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code RABONZO, ROBONZO, to start your free trial today. This episode was powered by ConvertKit. I have been a ConvertKit user since early 2016, and I really love it for the email marketing aspects of what I do. It's more than just an email marketing company, though. They are focused on landing pages, too, giving beginner creators everything they need to start building their email lists. Their new free plan allows creators to make unlimited landing pages and forms, and you can choose from multiple templates, personalize them with design, include an incentive email, create a thank you page, manage all your subscribers, and of course send broadcast emails. The support is great, and that is important to me. To learn how ConvertKit can help you connect with your audience so that you can make a living doing work you love, go to unstarvingmusician.com/convert or the show notes for this episode. Did you know you can help other independent artists find this podcast by subscribing
on Apple Podcast or wherever you are listening to your podcast these days. It really does help, so I hope you will consider it. And if you have feedback, please go to unstarvingmusician.com to get all my contact info. You can text me, call me, email me, leave a voice message right there on that page. Just go down to the bottom of the page and you'll find everything you need to know. I really would love to hear any of your comments, suggestions, questions, whatever you've got. And you can find links to just about everything talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. All right, I'm peacing out. Thank you for listening and sharing with your musician friends and fellow indie music fans. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love. Hey, folks. That's my Mark Maron impersonation. How did I do? Hey, please check out my new single, On Top of the World, at robonzo.com. From there, you can stream it on your favorite platform of choice. You can download it for free. You can buy it. Most of all, you can hear it. Again, that's robonzo.com, and the song is called On Top of the World. Love you. Until next time.